And the basic structure is that each panelist will have 8 to 10 minutes to offer their perspective on the topic of immigration. Now, because this is a large topic, I sent the panelists three kind of areas to focus in on, and that is the area of DACA, the area of the border wall, and the current practices of the administration regarding the border there. So those are the three areas that I asked that they would look at, 8 to 10 minutes each. This time I have a timer that will be timing you up here because last time we didn't have a timer and we kind of went over a little bit. So the timer's set at 9 minutes. And who has number one? Oh, number one. So let me introduce our first panelist here. Dr. Steve Fernandez has a bachelor's in physics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. After graduating from MIT, Steve went on to earn a master's in mechanical engineering with a concentration in energy engineering from the University of Massachusetts Lowell. Steve went on to get a PhD in sustainable energy engineering from UMass Lowell, where he focused on multivariate statistical methods and meta-heuristic algorithms. That's what I do on Friday night. Applied to the optimization of sustainable energy system design for communities in developing parts of the world. Steve has worked on sustainable energy projects in parts of Central America, South America, the Caribbean, and Africa in collaboration with MIT's D-Lab, UMass Lowell's Village Empowerment Program, Boston-based Students Without Borders, and through independent initiatives. Steve has undertaken this work using a community-driven approach that involves local-led initiatives, community-led decision-making, the use of locally available materials, and an economic model focused on cooperative enterprise and community reinvestment. Presently, Steve is a professor of first and second year engineering at Rowan University. He is a member of Engineers for Social Justice and Peace and Rowan University's Engineers Without Borders. Steve has been active in several grassroots social, economic, and environmental justice initiatives. Currently, Steve is active in Vineland Bridges, a local grassroots organization dedicated to promoting social justice for immigrants. And as he comes forward, let's please welcome him.
Thank you, Pastor. And first I want to start by recognizing and honoring the Lenni Lenape people. The Lenni Lenape are the original inhabitants of this area. Like many indigenous inhabitants, they welcomed immigrants and promoted peace, and too often we fail to give them the voice that they deserve to have, so I honor them. I would like to take time to start off by considering those areas from which people are arriving to the United States in the southern border. The areas include Mexico. I have some images from Mexico. I'll put it at the front. Guatemala. Honduras. And El Salvador. And I don't know if you can really see everything in these pictures, but when I look at them, they're beautiful. They're beautiful places, which raises a question. Why would people leave these beautiful lands? Why would they leave family, friends? Why would people choose to come to the United States bringing nothing? Why would people risk their lives and the lives of their family members, young children, to come to the United States? It's clear. Each individual must have their own reasons, but fundamentally, it's because their lives and the lives of the families are in danger. They have no other options. If they did, they would stay in their beautiful homelands. Why should the United States help? Well, first, it's the right thing to do. It's a humane thing to do. Good neighbors help neighbors in need. Second, international law. It mandates help to refugees. I think we could also learn a little bit from the words of Major General Smedley Butler. He gives a bit more insight into why the United States in particular should be helping these immigrants. Major General Smedley Butler held the highest rank possible at the time of his service and remains the most decorated Marine in U.S. history. In 1933, Major General Smedley Butler said, I quote, "I spent 33 years and 4 months as an active military service as a member of this country's most agile military force, the Marine Corps. I served in all commissioned ranks from second lieutenant to major general, and during that period, I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer. I was a gangster for capitalism. I suspected I was just part of a racket at the time. Now I'm sure of it. Like all members of the military profession, I never had a thought of my own until I left the service. My mental facilities remained in suspended animation while I obeyed the orders of higher-ups. This is typical of everyone in the military service. I helped make Mexico, especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to conduct revenues in. I helped the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefits of Wall Street. The record of racketeering is long. I helped purify Nicaragua for an international banking house of Brown Brothers, 1909 to 1912. Where have I heard that name before? I brought to light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1916. In China, I helped see that Standard Oil went its way unmolested. During those years, I had, as the boys in the back room would say, a swell racket. Looking back on it, I feel I could have given Al Capone a few hints. The best that he could do was operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents. Major General Smedley Butler, 1933. This is a list of U.S. interventions in Latin America. I've created a map to indicate the interventions of the United States in Latin America. 1846 to 1848, Mexico, full-scale war. Mexico cedes half its territory to the United States. 1852 to 1853, Argentina, Marines land in Buenos Aires. 1854, Nicaragua, Navy bombards and largely destroys the city of San Juan del Norte. 1855, Uruguay, Marines land in Montevideo. 1856 to 1885, Colombia, Marines land for counterinsurgency campaign to separate the country Panama from Colombia. 1857, Nicaragua. 1858, Uruguay. 1859, Paraguay and Mexico. 1867, Nicaragua. 1868, Uruguay. 1876, Mexico. 1890, Argentina. 1891, Chile and Haiti. 1894, Nicaragua. 1895, Colombia. 1896, Nicaragua again. 1898, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. 1898, Nicaragua. 1901 to 1903, Colombia and Panama. 1903, Honduras and Dominican Republic. 1906 to 1909, Cuba. They set up a government in Cuba. 1907, Nicaragua and Honduras. 1908, Panama. 1909, Nicaragua. 1910, Nicaragua again. 1911, Honduras. 1912, Cuba, Panama, and Honduras. 1912 to 1933, Nicaragua. The United States occupies Nicaragua for 20 years. 1913, Mexico. 1914, Dominican Republic and Mexico. 1915 to 1917, Mexico. 1914 to 1934, Haiti. The United States occupies Haiti. 1916 to 1924, Dominican Republic, 8-year occupation. 1917 to 1933, Cuba, 15-year occupation. 1918 to 20, Panama, over 2-year occupation. 1919, Honduras. 1920, Guatemala. 1924 to 1925, Honduras. 1925, Panama. 1932, El Salvador. 1933, Cuba. 1950, the bombing of Jayuya, Puerto Rico. 1954, Guatemala, overthrow of Allende. 1958, Panama. 1959, Haiti. 1961, Cuba. 1962, Cuba. 1963, Ecuador. 1964, Panama, Brazil. 1965, Dominican Republic. 1966 to 67, Guatemala. 73, Chile. 81 to 92, El Salvador. 78 to 90, Nicaragua. 83, Grenada. 83 to 89, Honduras. 86, Bolivia. 89 to 90, Panama. 91, Haiti. 94 to 96, Haiti. 2002 to 2015, playing Colombia. 2002, coup against Chavez in Venezuela. 2002, Haiti. 2009, support for the coup in Honduras. Note, the list I stated does not include all the officers, foreign officers trained in the United States School of the Americas. What are the consequences of these U.S. interventions? Many people killed, many people wounded. Massive destruction of buildings and infrastructure. Large-scale environmental devastation. Oppressive governments, oppressive forces. Foreign corporations benefit. What has the U.S. government done to atone for its actions? Nothing. No compensation, no restoration of destroyed property, no reparations to communities affected. We should insist that the United States government pays reparations to all the countries that the United States and its military forces have intervened in. The United States government provides support to help these places get to the point where people no longer feel that they have to flee for their lives. And in the meantime, we must insist that the United States government support immigrants, DACA, DAPA, and acceptance of all refugees from these affected locations until people no longer feel that they need to leave these beautiful lands. On top of U.S. government interventions, U.S. business and the engineers they employ have been empowered, have added to the suffering. Weapons, mining, agro and livestock, manufacturing have all added to the devastation. At the present time, right now, engineers are supporting the United States immigration policy, the oppressive policy. $22 million in contract for Dell for software support for ICE. $15 million in contract for Motorola Solutions for radio communications and equipment. $76 million for network operations from Hewlett-Packard. Geo Group, $100 million. Ankle braces and monitoring. Virtual border wall, $110 million. Anduril Industries, predictive and preemptive modeling, facial recognition, data analysis, border wall. Huge amounts of money for engineering institutions. Why is this important to engineers? I'm an engineer, and I feel it's very important because I understand the fundamental canon of engineering. Canon number 1, engineers in the fulfillment of the profession shall hold paramount the safety, health, welfare of the public. Engineers supporting Border Patrol and ICE are not doing that. They're doing the opposite. The U.S. government policy, until the U.S. government policy is changed, engineers should commit to the following, and the public must hold them accountable. They should not provide technical support to ICE or Border Patrol, not provide data development software resources, not do biometric identification, not develop surveillance equipment, not do predictive modeling, and not design a border wall. We need to understand that what supersedes nationality, national identity, is the fact that we're human beings. We're all valuable human beings, and the U.S. government's policies are meant to dehumanize, and we must take that back and bring humanity back into our society. Thank you.
Who has number 2? All right, Mr. Grossman, let me read your bio. Give me 1 second here. My printer wasn't working today. So, Mr. Grossman graduated at Atlantic City High School in 1967, Duke University in 1971, and Temple Law School in 1975. Mr. Grossman has been a well-known and respected attorney in Atlantic and Cape May counties since. Mr. Grossman helped create the Chelsea neighborhood in Atlantic City in 1975. In 1986, he won a citywide election and served as an independent on city council for the next 4 years. In 1988, Mr. Grossman upset an incumbent by winning the Republican primary election by a single vote. Mr. Grossman then easily won election to become an Atlantic County freeholder. Between 2006 and today, Seth Grossman, while still maintaining his law practice, hosted several popular talk radio programs, taught at Atlantic Cape Community College, and published opinion columns in all of South Jersey's major newspapers. Mr. Grossman is the Republican candidate for the New Jersey 2nd Congressional District. Let's all welcome Mr. Grossman.
Thank you, and I know my Democratic opponent, Jeff Andrew, was offered the opportunity to be here as well, but declined. And what I come to, so here I am, I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, and I'm Jewish. Some people think that's inconsistent, but after listening to what was going on, I'm thinking about what brought my family from persecution in Russia to America just over 100 years ago. One reason was, of course, back then there was no Israel. There was no other place for persecuted Jews to go. And the United States was one of the only places that Jews could go. If there were an Israel, I'm sure my grandmother would have gone to Israel. The second thing is the hatred that surrounded my grandparents just because they were Jewish was because all of their non-Jewish neighbors were living in poverty and misery and violence, and they were blaming all of their failures on the Jews. In my view, just as many people in other countries are blaming all of their failures on America. And I sincerely believe that that the socialism and communism and so-called progressive ideas of the regimes running Central and South America have caused far more damage, misery, violence, and poverty than anything the Marines could have occasionally done 60, 80, and 100 years ago. Before we decide whether we should enforce our immigration laws, because all of the issues, a border wall, the DACA, deferred action for childhood arrivals, where Trump's current policy of enforcing our immigration laws. The fact that we're actually discussing this is unusual as someone who believes in our Constitution, our democracy, and our laws. Because one of the things that made America prosperous and free and safe and comfortable for so many years was that we settled our disputes by having elections, by having rules as to how laws were made in our Constitution, and by respecting those laws. And if laws turned out to be unfair or unjust, such as laws against liquor and other things, we amended the Constitution, we changed our laws, but we always respected our laws. Whereas the countries from which many refugees are escaping poverty, misery, and violence, you don't have countries where people are taught to respect the law. And that's why I think it's so important. Before we talk about these policies of the border wall, we have to say, well, all these are ways to enforce the law. So the real question we should ask is, how do we get these laws, and are they worth enforcing? Of course, our country is 240 years old, basically. And for the first 100 years of America, we didn't have any limits on immigration. Anybody from any country could come here for any reason and live here. And for the first 100 years, it worked. Why did it work? Two reasons. Number one, the only way to get here was in a sailboat. And sailing ships would take 2 to 3 months to get here under the most miserable and awful conditions in which many people got sick and many people died. So there was just a trickle of immigrants coming to this country for the first 100 years. And also, we had wide open spaces. We could argue about what happened with the Native Americans, how much was disease, how much was war, how much was wrongdoing by Europeans. But whatever it is, the land was pretty much empty. All that changed about 150 years ago, 1870, 1880, 1890. You had millions and millions of immigrants from all over the world coming to America because you had these huge steamships that brought immigrants to America, and those steamships were being paid for basically by the railroad corporations and big corporations that wanted to encourage cheap labor to come to America. And so between 1870 and 1920, for 50 years, Americans had a debate over immigration, just as we're having a debate now. Now, on the side of the open borders, you had two main proponents for open borders. Don't change anything. Anyone, anywhere in the world who wants to come to America, let them come. And they were the big railroads who were given land, and they ran these railroads, and then they would sell the land to the immigrants who would have farms, and then they would keep raising the rates of the railroad rates to make sure they would make huge profits from the people who bought the land for very cheap. You also had big corporations and big business wanted cheap labor. And let's face it, you also had socialists and communists who wanted people from other countries who were poor and miserable to promote their causes to bring their world revolution. Who was it that wanted limits on immigration? It was basically the middle class. It was the labor unions at that time who wanted they wanted higher wages, and they didn't want unlimited immigrants driving down the wages. So the labor unions were a major force. And by the way, that's what made American labor unions different from the labor unions in the rest of the world, right? The rest of the world, the labor unions preached world revolution, and they celebrated their holiday on May 1st, May Day. American labor unions deliberately were different, and we had Labor Day in September to show they were different. That what American labor wanted was reduced immigration, higher wages. The other people who wanted lower immigration, who benefited, were African Americans in the South. They wanted to escape the Jim Crow. They came north looking for jobs. And when you had unlimited immigration, you had constant violence between the newly arrived immigrants who were told to work for low wages and African Americans who were given even lower wages. And that caused conflict. So what happened after 50 years, after all this? And by the way, the Statue of Liberty was built during this time of great immigration debate. Now, the Statue of Liberty is actually, official name is Liberty Enlightening the World. And in one hand, she's holding up a torch to enlighten the world. In the other hand, she's holding a model of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. We're all created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The original message of the Statue of Liberty was, we have this Constitution, we have this law, we have this individual liberty and freedom. If you, the rest of the world, adopt our Constitution, and if you follow our system of law and opportunity, you can enjoy the same life that we have here. That was the original purpose of the Statue of Liberty. Of course, later on, you had a socialist wrote that poem at the base, Emma Lazarus, who said, "Give me your tired and poor." But you always had a conflict, actually, as to what the Statue of Liberty meant. That debate is being repeated right now. The end result, 1920s, was that we reduced legal immigration to 300,000 per year, 1920 to 1965. What was the result of that reduction of immigrants, legal immigrants, to 300,000? Well, first of all, we had a labor shortage. Wages went up. When wages went up, what did the corporations do? They invented new machinery, new assembly lines, new inventions. Worker productivity increased at the greatest level in human history. Wealth increased at the greatest level in human history. The American middle class was created. Every American had plumbing, had coffee, had bananas, had all these things that used to be luxuries the average middle class family had. African Americans had something called the Great Migration, where more and more African Americans moved out of the Jim Crow South. In fact, Atlantic City, there's a book, if you could look it up, Atlantic City was called The New Promised Land, where in Atlantic City, there was a woman called Sarah Spencer Washington, first African-American multi-millionaire in the 1920s during this time. Many old-timers may remember the Apex beauty products that made her so wealthy. So they had this huge wealth, and what happened? The KKK disappeared, the riots disappeared, the poverty disappeared, and America became a wealthy and prosperous place. Is that the
That's your time. Yep.
Okay. So I think that we understand it all came to an end in 1965 when they increased legal immigration to 1.2 million a year and then had illegal immigration on top of it. We are repeating many of the same problems we had between 1870 and 1920. Thank you.
Who's number 3?
Number 3.
You're number 3. All right, give me 1 second. Get the bios here. Reverend David Mallory, right? Is the current senior pastor of the First Baptist Church of Richland, New Jersey, a position he has held since 1969. He is a retired administrator of the New Jersey Department of Human Service, having served in state government for 42 years. He has served his last 9 years at the local office manager of the Cumberland County Office of the New Jersey Division of Child Protection and Permanency, previously known as DYFS. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Sociology and his Master of Divinity degrees at the Virginia Union University in Richmond, Virginia, where he was a participant in the sit-in of civil rights movement. He received his Master of Social Work Administration at Rutgers University and undertook studies in advanced statistics at Rowan University. He is a strong proponent of human rights, a devoutly patriotic citizen, and a supporter of U.S. veterans. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Reverend. I've written my notes out so that I can come in on time. Much appreciation for those responsible for this forum, which provides us opportunity to share and hear one another's thoughts on U.S. immigration. The subject is perfect for these times. My decades as a pastor, sociology professor, and administrator in our state's child welfare system compels me to focus on the values we hold as citizens that relate to immigration policy. As citizens, it's always been our desire that any policies impacting the lives of people embody our highest ideals, whether they be citizens, immigrants, or refugees. Our nation's ideals are not new. They are embodied in part in our Declaration of Independence, which you just heard, which boldly asserts that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights that include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, our ideals and values were further shaped by the inscription that has become on the Statue of Liberty, expressing how others perceived our country. And I quote, "Give me your tired and your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuge of your teeming shores. Send these, the homeless, tempest taught to me, for I lift my lamp beside the golden door." A golden doorway. That was the way others have seen our nation, and that is what was added to our country, added to how our country came to understand itself. Our values, our mission, and our pride as a nation has been rooted in our laws and policies that acknowledge this proposition, that fellow human beings are the earth's greatest treasures. And that acknowledgement has influenced our policies on immigration through the years. In 1783, a few months after the end of the Revolutionary War, it was George Washington himself who made this defining statement about the dedication of our new country to humanity as it settled among the nations of the world. And I quote, The bosom of America is open to receive not only the opulent and respected strangers, but the oppressed and persecuted of all nations and religions, whom we shall welcome to participate of all our rights and privileges, unquote. That century-old perspective of a national mission should continue as a guide in our shaping immigration policy as we face masses of people seeking to immigrate at our southern borders. This perspective and those values that have led our nation to embrace millions of immigrants through the years should undergird the immigration policies that we seek today. Policies not only concerning our borders, but also children we reference under the acronym of DACA, Deferred Action for Child Arrivals. These children came here with parents who were illegal immigrants and were raised, educated, and enculturated in this country. And except for having a legal status, they are truly citizens in every other respect. They know no other country, no other land except this land, and they want to stay and build their lives here. If we formulate policies outside the perspectives and the values we've held and succeeded with for centuries, we betray our values and denigrate our country. For instance, the recent policy regarding the separating of children from their families to discourage parents from seeking to immigrate here is such an example. The proposed walling off of the very people referenced in the words of the Statue of Liberty and in George Washington's statement is in diametric opposition to the values and ideals that have guided us through the years. Well, we are aware that policies must be reviewed and updated, but the values by which we live and define who we are must remain stable and continue their influence in our national life. It was these same values in the mid-1800s that beckoned to our shores 1/2 of the population, the then population of Ireland. Between 1820 and 2010, those values beckoned 75 million immigrants here from around the world, and they beckon 1 million legal immigrants here every year since 2000. And just 2 years ago, our population of 323 million people constituted 44 million immigrants, representing almost 15% of our population. I think we all may be unaware of why good people who are leaving their homelands and literally running here for their lives would have desire to enter here illegally. Is it because our vetting system is unwelcoming or too understaffed to lawfully and humanely process them in a timely manner? A valid study of these factors could be helpful. It is notable that a 2018 this year scientific study, found that undocumented immigration to the United States did not increase violent crime. There is no empirical evidence that either legal or illegal immigration increases crime in the United States. What we have been hearing about immigrations and immigrants is inconsistent with factual findings. If we want to evolve meaningful policies that are right for our country and true to our values, we must be truthful. I believe that building policy on what is not truthful is as dangerous to our nation as an invading army. Concern here is not so much a matter of legally wording an immigration policy, rather it is a matter of what values are influencing its injunctions. May I leave you with this thought. It is you, fellow citizens of this land, that can exert a great and magnificent influence on immigration and other policies. And if you want for yourself and others the full benefits of American democracy, then you must exercise your full responsibility. Vote.
And he had 20 seconds to spare. Thank you very much there. So at this time, I just want to give you a reminder, after our next speaker, we're going to begin, Tristan, back there, is going to be collecting those index cards that you can write a question on. Please write legibly, since I have to be the one to interpret them. As I've noted before in previous forums, I reserve the full discretion and right to say a question or not to say a question or to rephrase the question, because again, the purpose of these questions are to seek to understand, not to single any one person out or so forth. So it's have that dialogue. So I apologize up front if I don't ask your question there. So next up, a longtime friend of mine, Mr. Bert Lopez, is the Public Affairs Manager at Atlantic City Electric. He has served Atlantic City Electric in a variety of roles for more than 30 years. He's a producer and host of a weekly television show, Latino Motion, with Bert Lopez, which airs on NBC 40. The program highlights issues impacting local South Jersey Latino community while advancing the understanding of Latino culture and contributions to society. Lopez is past president and founder of the Hispanic Alliance of Atlantic County. He was the first Latino elected to the Atlantic City Board of Education and the first Latino to serve as the president of its board. He is the past chairman of the Atlantic Cumberland chapter of the American Red Cross and a fellow board member of Gateway Community Action Partnership. Let's join together in welcoming Mr. Bert Lopez.
Buenos dias. Thank you for having me here today, and certainly this is a very important topic for me. I did want to start by thanking Pastor Rob Weinstein for directing the panelists of what this forum was all about, and certainly for directing us to the website of the values that this church believes in. And I happened to, I went on that link, Pastor. I did go on that link, and it states that you believe in the power of the Holy Spirit, whose fruits is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. It also goes on to say that you believe diversity and collaboration makes us stronger, not weaker, and that you respect and fight for the well-being of all people as children of God, and especially those who may be different. It also states that you embrace and work alongside people of different faiths and erasing the lines between us and them. Isn't that a wonderful foundation to have this immigration discussion on? I do believe that having respect for people is just as important as having respect for the law. Yet, today we're faced with unchristian acts that separate children from their parents, keeping 8,000 DACA qualified youth from realizing their dream, placing a travel ban based upon religion. I believe, and I struggle every day to understand why people who believe in God and who call themselves Americans would embrace and not see this as anything other than shameful. I want to just touch base on a few of the issues that face immigration. I'm going to start with the family separation. Today, Congress held an all-day hearing grilling an FBI agent to discredit the Mueller investigation on the Russia intervention on our elections. Congressman Luis Gutierrez from Illinois questioned why this was the focus of Congress and not on hearings on reuniting the children with their families. I couldn't agree with him more. The inhumane treatment of children and family is not the right thing to do. We are much better than this. We need to help the desperation that reaches our borders by helping social, economic issues that drive that desperation. And just imagine what it takes for a mother to pick her family to go miles, hundreds of miles, in very bad conditions, taking that risk of their lives to come to the U.S. There's a problem there. There's a lot of desperation, and we can't ignore that desperation. Let me just touch base on DACA. These are children that have come to this country as youth, some of them newborns. I happen to know quite a number of those DACA qualified individuals. The majority of Americans believe and support a path forward for these qualified DACA youth, and yet we see that Congress is holding them hostage, so to speak, by not finding the way for this to move forward to allow those DACA students to realize their dreams. We're hoping and we're praying that that happens real soon. Let me talk in general in terms of the whole issue of undocumented and the 11.3 million immigrants that are here today. I recently saw a video of a lady that was wearing a T-shirt with a Puerto Rican flag, and she was harassed repeatedly within view of a police officer who wouldn't do anything about the harassment. The harasser telling her that this is America and that she should not be wearing that T-shirt. He was questioning her citizenship even though she was Puerto Rican. Imagine that type of harassment on folks who are undocumented, that they get that kind of abuse on a daily basis. It's unmanageable for many of us. It's about time that we come up with a comprehensive immigration reform that can provide a path forward for those citizens, for those individuals, a pathway for citizens, for the 11 million hardworking immigrants that are here today. Let me just give you a little bit of some data. So I mentioned it was 11.3. The workforce in the United States, 8 million of those 11.3 are working. They're producing and providing for our economy. They're hardworking individuals providing for their families. Another fact that you should know is that 66% or 2/3 of them have been here more than 10 years. It's about time that we saw a way forward for our Congress to come up with comprehensive immigration reform. We do need to have secure borders. I'm not in agreement with just abolishing ICE. But I think there's reforms that could be made there so that it is doing what it's supposed to be doing. We need to work on collaborating on both sides of the wall. Maybe the wall's not the answer, but we need to collaborate to imagine what we could do with that money that goes towards the wall to help solve some of the problems that are driving that desperation to come to the United States. So I'm going to leave this with just one quick plea for the Congress, and that is that they should take the We Believe In page from Bethany Grace Community Church as their motto, and embrace the people that are come here as immigrants and finally come up with a sound immigration reform. Thank you for your time.
And again, you had 2 minutes to spare. Thank you, sir. So at this time, I'm also going to ask Tristan to collect there's Tristan. Everybody say hi, Tristan, there. See, they're so well trained. Please pass the cards to the middle so he can take them for you. And at this time, we have Mr. John Robert Carmen. And there's things that he wanted to say as part of his bio, so I'm just going to say he is a student at Wilmington University, where I'm a professor at. He has founded the New Jersey Constitutional Republicans in 2017 to reform the party back to the principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, which protects those principles. Let's show our appreciation to Mr. Carman.
Thank you. Much. Thank you, Dr. Weinstein, for having these forums. Thank you all for attending. It's a pleasure to be up here with all the gentlemen. In 1759, Marcus Kerman came to Philadelphia from Germany. During the same time, Benjamin Franklin wrote about the large number of German settlers coming to Pennsylvania at that time. Quote, "Those who come hither are generally of the most ignorant, stupid sort of their own nation. Not being used to liberty, they know not how to make a modest use of it. Yet, I am not for refusing entirely to admit them into our colonies. All that seems to be necessary is to distribute them equally, mix them with the English, and establish English schools where they are now too thick settled." Marcus Kerman would change his name from Kurrman to the more Anglo and English-sounding and looking Carman, Carman. Marcus would go on to marry Elizabeth Otto, whose father, Dr. Budo Otto, was a senior surgeon of the Continental Army under General George Washington. Marcus Carman was my great-grandfather 4 times, and I am a 7th-generation American. This history resonates with me and gives me an appreciation for those who have migrated and continue migrating to the United States. It also makes me appreciative of the challenge immigrants have in coming to America and the prejudices that are inherently exist within each one of us as being a part of our carnal nature, or the natural state of our nature, if you will. Most everyone here tonight has relatives and ancestors that originally came to America from somewhere else. Although we may be very diverse in our ethnicity, we are all one in our humanity. As being human, we are all the same in our creation, created in the very image of God. And initially, we all share and came from the same 2 parents. One example of the division that exists in our nation today is that on immigration and immigration policy. Unlike any nation that has ever existed, America has been the most generous and welcoming of those from other nations. No nation has welcomed a larger number of immigrants from a greater variety of national and religious origins than these United States. And as my distinguished gentleman said earlier, George Washington wrote, "The bosom of America is open to receive not only the opulent and the respectable stranger, but the oppressed and persecuted of all nations and religions." Shortly before the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln gave a speech in Chicago and described how many American citizens at that time were not the actual blood descendants of the American founders. His speech is known as the Electric Cord speech. Quote, "If they look back through this history to trace their connection with those days by blood, they find that they have none. They cannot carry themselves back into the glorious epoch and make themselves feel that they are part of us. But when they look through that old Declaration of Independence, they find that those old men say that, quote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they feel that the moral sentiment taught in that day evidences their relation to those men. That is the farther of all moral principle in them, and that they have a right to claim it as though they were the blood of the blood and flesh of the men who wrote the Declaration, and so they are." This is the electric cord in that declaration that links the hearts of patriotic and liberty-loving men together, that will link those patriotic hearts as long as the love of freedom exists in the minds of men throughout the world. Dr. Thomas West describes in his book, Immigration and the Moral Conditions of Citizenship, that although Lincoln was speaking to European Americans at that time, there is nothing in his account of citizenship that is limited to just Europeans. Any human being can become an American. because the equality principle found in the Declaration of Independence that defines America, as Lincoln wrote on another occasion, quote, an abstract truth applicable to all men at all times, unquote. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 of the Constitution describes the responsibility that our Congress has in establishing a uniform rule of naturalization. Rules have occurred throughout our history limiting the number of immigrants and specifically defining where immigrants could come from seeking citizenship. Some of these rules have been indeed discriminatory for and against all ethnicities from throughout the world. It is necessary to remember that the principles described in the Declaration of Independence, such as the equality of all mankind and the unalienable natural rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, also include the principle of the social compact theory, which identifies the necessity of the consent of those governed, agreed to be governed by the obligatory instituted government that secures the individual's natural rights. The preamble of the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780 expresses the founders' view, quote, the body politic is formed by a voluntary association of individuals. It is a social compact by which the whole people covenants with each citizen, and each citizen with the whole people, that all shall be governed by certain laws for the common good. Our representatives in Congress, therefore, must consider an aspect of the right to liberty, is that all people are free to associate with or to form a compact with whomever they wish. Before individuals enter the social compact, they are free to become fellow citizens with whomever they choose. Congress must weigh the necessity of having to exclude newcomers from citizenship simply because once a people forms itself, no one has the right to join it without the consent of those being joined. No outsider has any more right to claim membership in an already existing people than he has a right to intrude himself into a household where he was not or has not been invited. The social compact theory gives our citizens the right to exclude those they deem as unwarranted, rather than an obligation to receive any expatriates. Thomas Jefferson contemplated the possibility of those immigrants coming to America would bring with them the effects of the despotism and oppression that they were eager to leave behind. He also feared that some would lack self-control and be ill-equipped to practice temperate liberty. Alexander Hamilton wrote, the safety of a republic depends essentially on the energy of a common national sentiment, on a uniformity of principles and habits, on the immigration and the moral conditions of citizenship, exemption of the citizens from foreign bias and prejudice, and on the love of country, which will almost invariably be found to be closely connected with birth, education, and family. Hamilton also discussed the necessity of acclimating immigrants into, quote, the preservation of a national spirit and a national character. Today, potential citizens must be evaluated on their habits and principles and their capacity to respect and preserve the natural rights of all United States citizens. Potential citizens must be evaluated as individuals, not groups, who display and have maintained quality character traits that generally want to assimilate with other liberty and freedom-loving, law-abiding fellow Americans. Largely because our representatives at every branch of government have reneged on their sworn duty to faithfully uphold and defend our United States Constitution, thereby having failed to properly secure the rights of those they represent, which has resulted in the current immigration crisis today in our country. An example of how representatives have called for this crisis is due to 7 amnesties passed by Congress since 1986 and granted to illegal aliens in our country. Amnesty discourages respect for law, treats law-breaking aliens better than law-following aliens, and encourages future unlawful immigration to the United States. Illegal immigrants in our nation clearly commit a level of violent and drug-related crimes disproportionate to the population, of which some estimate is over 11 million illegal immigrants in our country. Thus, judging by the numbers in federal prisons alone, non-citizens commit federal crimes at 3 times the rate of citizens. Victor Davis Hanson describes how vocabulary changes always reflect the agendas of political debate. The left insists on referring to illegal aliens as undocumented aliens, or amnesty for dreamers as examples. What does sanctuary city really imply other than a place where advocates of illegal immigration ignore and override federal law to allow illegal aliens to reside, often in violation of the state, local, and federal laws? Yet a more honest description of sanctuary cities in states like New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles would be secessionist cities or states. They are, after all, defiant states' rights enclaves that argue in Confederate fashion that the federal government and our Constitution ultimately have no power over their states' rights pushback. They recall the insurrectionary manner in which South Carolina in 1861 defiantly declared the federal laws within its borders were null and void, and so helped begin the Civil War. Now the immigration crisis is leveraged by the progressives and the socialists that make up the Democratic Party to promote open borders, multiculturalism, and globalism. In part, open borders reflect a political desire to recalibrate the demography of the American Southwest and thereby empower the Democratic Party and its progressive operatives in government, universities, and the media to secure permanent ruling majorities. The Democratic Party will compromise the rule of law and the securing the natural rights of American citizens for recruiting new voters within the citizens must fund with the redistribution of their property, chiefly their taxed earnings to pay for illegals with subsidized welfare, health care, and college tuitions. Our founders would be astonished at the lust for political expediency and the power for some at the expense of properly securing the rights of all Americans with properly governed, just, and productive immigration policies. We, the people, those of us who agree to be governed with a contractual understanding that government is instituted by us and will secure our natural rights, the citizens, first. Therefore, we must hold our elected representatives accountable to securing our rights with just immigration and law enforcement. That would include enforcing the laws already codified for apprehending and deporting illegal immigrants, outlawing sanctuary cities and states, putting justice back in the criminal justice system, and punishing crimes committed by illegal aliens and criminals with swift and just retribution, holding employers accountable for hiring lawful citizens and severely fining those who do not. Remove our armed forces stationed throughout the world and equip them on the borders to prevent illegal entry. Properly vetting those who seek citizenship and verifying their desire to live in freedom and respect the natural rights of their fellow American citizens. Immigration policies must first, as the founders intended, be utilized to protect the American people. In his letter to the Hebrew congregation in Newport, Rhode Island, George Washington wrote, "The citizens of the United States have the right to applaud themselves for having given to mankind examples of an enlarged and liberal policy worth of imitation. All possess alike liberty of conscience and the immunities of citizenship. It is now no more that toleration is spoken of, as it were, by the indulgence of one class of citizens, that another enjoy the exercise of their inherent natural rights, for happily the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, and requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving it all on occasions with effectual support. America is different from and superior to countries based on a common ethnic or racial background or a common religion, because its government protects the inherent natural rights of all human beings. By your mercy and your providence, O God, may these United States and its government of we the people do better to secure the rights of all the people."
Thank you. Thank you. And last but not least, we have Mr. William Benfer. You don't need to go up quite so high. Yeah. He is currently running for New Jersey's congressional representative seat in District 2 as an independent, non-affiliated candidate. He was born and raised in Millville, New Jersey, in Cumberland County, where he continues to live today. He has worked for the state of New Jersey in two capacities. The first was as an employee of the state parks and forestry services at Belle Plains State Park. The second was as a corrections officer at Southern State Correctional Facility. He holds a Bachelor's of Science in Multimedia Design. Let's show our appreciation to Mr. William Benfer.
Dr. Timer?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, thank you all for coming. Thanks to Rob for having this kind of event. I'm not a politician, I'm just like one of you guys, but I'm running because of the things that I've seen today, and immigration is one of them. I know you said to talk about the border wall. I haven't heard too much about the border wall, so I should just throw my notes away. The good thing about going last is I'm the last guy you'll see up here, but the bad thing about it is most of the points have been touched on already. So the border wall to me is a knee-jerking reactionary solution to a much larger scale problem that we have with immigration. I lived in San Diego for 12 years. I saw the fencing, you know, when I would go south towards Mexico. And it goes all the way along the 8 into Arizona and into Texas, into New Mexico. There is a fence line there already. They call it a fence, it's a wall. I thought it was a road when I was traveling along the 8, but it wasn't. It was the wall. I don't know where the money's gonna go. I just think it's a ridiculous solution to a much more serious problem. So before I start talking about current issues with immigration, I was ignorant through my complacency. I didn't know anything about immigration until I started to look into it. So, I mean, just like with all of us, you don't know anything until you are either taught it or you learn it yourself. So what I learned was there's a lot more to this issue than we're really discussing. And so since nobody else touched on how it really what it takes to become a citizen, I'm going to talk to you about what I learned now, about what it takes to become a citizen in this country, other than by being born here. To become a citizen in the country, you basically have one way to go about doing it. You have to become a lawful permanent resident. A lot of us know that as getting your green card. And to get a green card, there's 3 ways, and they're not easy. And this is the only pathway to real citizenship. The number one thing, we hear a lot about it, and we hear it in the news, it's this, you know, terminology that we just say, oh, okay, chain migration. Sure, that sounds bad. But it's family-based petitions. And what these mean is that a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, a parent, a spouse, an adult child, or citizen, or somebody who's already in the country, wants to get a family member into the country, they file petitions to do that. Now, this can take anywhere from 1 to 22 years to be completed. It blew me away when I heard that number. So when you apply to become a permanent resident, you go through all the background checks. You go through the medical exams. There's fees upon fees upon fees. Some states won't even accept a petition unless they have an immigration lawyer do it for them. So that works. That's one way that works for people living outside the country. But a lot of the people that are crossing the border illegally, that's not going to work for them. What if they don't have family members here? The number 2 way is employment-based petitions. That's when a U.S. employer says, we need somebody to come in here and work for us. We can't find anybody here in the United States to do it. We're going to look outside the United States, and we're going to try to get somebody who's skilled in a position like a doctor, a lawyer, even pro athletes from Cuba, Guatemala, and countries that we've already heard about. This is hard as well because they have to prove, the employers have to prove without a shadow of a doubt that they can't hire anybody else that's already a citizen. So when you have that kind of a stipulation, it's hard to get that pathway to citizenship as well. The third one is by a diversity lottery system. And a lot of people have talked about the lottery system being awful, but it's not bringing in illegal immigrants. It's not bringing in people from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, because these are places that are excluded from this list, because these are places that traditionally send a lot of people to this country. They're not included in the lottery system. 50,000 people worldwide enter, and they go through the same background checks, they go through the same medical checks, everything that everybody else goes through, but they're just into the lottery system from places like Sweden, France, places that usually don't send a lot of immigrants to our country. Now, the current administration has actively sought to eliminate or drastically reduce options number 1 and 3. Now, this is a very narrow path to citizenship as it is. If we narrow it even further so that only employers can bring in citizens legally, what are we doing? I feel like that's going to encourage more people to cross the border illegally, more people to come across and not go through the process, because the process is biased. It doesn't suit the people that are trying to come here in the first place. And we don't have an immigration problem in my mind. After studying this, I try to look at everything in a stoic sense, meaning I take my personal biases and I put them aside and try to see what's the truth. And the truth is, we have an immigration policy problem. We label people that cross the border as illegal immigrants when most of them should be labeled as refugees. They should not be labeled as illegal immigrants just because they're on their feet crossing an imaginary line. These are people, like some people have spoken about today, who are escaping their lives in another country. They're fleeing for their safety. They're trying to help their children. I have 2 kids. My daughter is 4 and my son is 6. And I would do anything for them to be safe. If all of a sudden America imploded, we were no longer the reserve world currency and money went out the window, it was bedlam, I would do anything. I would sneak across Canada's border to protect them. I'm sure a lot of you people would too. And we also have to remember that every one of us sitting in this room, we all fall into only 4 categories of becoming citizens, if we are citizens. Number 1, your ancestors were Native American. As far back as you can see, you're from America. Number 2, you're an immigrant. Your ancestors came here, or you came here as an immigrant and went through the process of immigration. Number 3, you're a refugee. Your ancestors escaped a country in which they or their family were in danger to come and try to be safe. And number 4, your ancestor was brought here as a slave. Those are the 4 pathways to where we are right now. Now, I'm guessing there's not that many truly 100% Native American blooded people in this room. Where's the empathy? I see a lot of people today talking about immigration and immigrants as criminals. The law that they're breaking to cross the border is a misdemeanor. The laws that companies are breaking by hiring these individuals for working for them, to work for them, is a federal tax crime. Why aren't we going after these companies instead of going from the bottom of the money to the top of the money? If you want to solve a problem like immigration, or really anything for that matter, go to the money. If you take away the source of the money, you're going to take away the source of the problem. People won't come here if they can't profit from it or if they can't expand the welfare of their lives from it. Now, I'm not a proponent of saying, don't come here. I don't want open borders. I feel like borders are important. Every free and democratic country in the world has borders, and they all have immigration policies. But we have to fix our immigration policy to allow people refugee status. 2/3 of most of the people that come across the border right now illegally are refugees. And there is a difference. There is a difference. If you're seeking asylum, then you should be given that asylum. We signed an accord and ratified it in 1967 with the United Nations. And that accord said that we will help refugees. We will help with each other, the world throughout. Now, that would do 3 things if we actually took that on. It would stop us spending so much money to replace and detain or house these people. The UN would help us. It would also take criminality aspects out of the process. And it would basically eliminate the red tape that these people have to go through to try to become legalized citizens of this country. Obama had a plan, and a lot of people didn't like it, and it was called Catch and Release, another catchy name. That sounds bad when you hear it, but what it did was they would detain people, they would give them a court date, they would send them home with their families, and then 95% of those people actually showed up for their court date. That cost $17 a day per person. What we're doing now with Trump's policy costs us $260 a day per person to detain them. Just to detain them, not to replace them. That's a lot of taxpayer money. And it goes to a lot of private prison owners and detainment creators. There's a lot of money being made right now to make people illegal immigrants instead of refugees, in which they really are. This is a problem that we can solve. And looking at it from a Stoic sense, like I did, it's easy to see. People argue about the left and the right. That's why I'm an independent. I don't care. Let them fight each other. But all of us, we see the truth. We believe that we can do things together and make things better. And I believe it too. And this is just another one of those problems that when you look at it from a sense that removes emotion, you can solve it. There's already policies in place that can solve this problem. We just need to implement them. Thank you very much for your time.
So let's give all of our panelists a round of applause. So at this point, I want to talk about, is this working, Nick? All right. Can you hear me? I think you can just hear me because I'm loud. Okay. All right. So one of the things that came up, we've just kind of touched on it, was the idea about the children and the separation of children from the families at the border. And this question was, can you explain how, if we are law-abiding Americans, we can be separating children and families? What law requires this? What law would even allow such a thing? All people are entitled to due process, including asylum seekers. So I would like two comments. The first two people that I see raise their hand. Anybody? Nobody? Bert, and then Nick.
All right, well, certainly it is a tragedy.
Hold on, that's not going to work. Nick is up there going, no. All right, so. There you go. Thank you, Bert.
As I was saying, it is a tragedy, and I have the same questions. This is all done through policy, through the Trump administration. It is a shame. And reunifying of those families has become as much as an issue as the separation itself, and it continues. The court has ordered the reunification, and yet it still has not happened. And as I mentioned in my statement, Congress is holding hearings about the Mueller investigation, grilling an FBI agent to discredit him, instead of focusing on things like this. How do we get those kids back with their families? It's a real tragedy.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I don't know what law that would be. What the argument is from the Trump administration, of what I understand, is that, which I don't agree with, is that basically the parents are criminals. And if you were a criminal, just arrested as a citizen, you would be separated from your families as well. But this is different. This is kids being put into cages. And I know that one side of this argument says that's not true. But I can't deny what my eyes see. I can't deny the videos that have been shown. And we're better than this. We're better than this. We could solve problems without using fear. Because that's really what's going on here. They're trying to use fear and terrorist tactics as a way to tell these people, don't come here. I mean, the president himself said it. If you don't want to separate families, don't come here illegally. And it's abhorrent, and it's something that in America I never thought I'd see happen.
I'm going to go ahead and I'll let y'all, Mr. Grossman and Dr. Fernandez.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Suppose you come on a plane to Philadelphia Airport with your children, and you don't have a passport, and you have no right to be on that flight, and you go to customs, and you're supposed to show your passport, and you just grabbed your children and ran through the gate, and they caught you in the parking lot. What is supposed to happen? Are you supposed to be all locked up together? Or are we supposed to just say, well, it's okay, instead of a passport, you have a kid? And the kid's a substitute for a passport? How does the law get enforced? Now you don't know, there's a child, there's an adult. How do you know the children are really the children of the adult who's with them? You don't know. We have all sorts of human traffickers, we have drug dealers, we have all sorts of criminals. We know that because just here in this district, there have been 9 violent crimes committed by MS gang members who do stuff like that. So what I'm saying is, in my opinion, the people who are upset with this humanity, and you could hear it in the arguments, they don't like the law. They don't want the law enforced. They think that we have 320 million people in America. We have 7 billion people outside of America, many with dictatorial, radical Islamic, communist, socialist regimes, mafia regimes, and they think the solution is, instead of fixing problems in our own country, to come here and force us to become weaker, more violent, more poor, more divided. How does America do any good for humanity by being a poor, violent, miserable country? And just ask yourself, think of America today. Think of America before 1965, when we had immigration limited to 300,000 per year, and when immigration laws were enforced. Were we better off before 1965 or after 1965? What kind of America do you want to give your children or grandchildren?
Child separation is abhorrent. It's the law. I agree, it was a law. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, never forget, everything that Adolf Hitler did in Nazi Germany was legal. All right? There's laws. The United States separated black children from their parents. It was the law. The United States separated Native American children from their parents. It was the law. There are unjust laws and there are abhorrent laws, laws that should not be violated. The Geneva Convention has said violation of laws in the Nuremberg trials. Following orders is not enough. Following the law is not enough if it's a crime against humanity. And separating children from their parents is a crime against humanity.
I would ask that while we're having the conversation, that at the end of each statement, you're welcome to do the applause, no boos. But while we're speaking, let's let everybody hear there. I understand the excitement in the room. But I think one of the things that comes up as we're talking about this, and I'll say as I'm watching the news, is how people kind of get lumped together. There's people that are illegally crossing the border, I believe, right? There's asylum seekers, those people who come over to the border and are going to a place and asking for asylum, right? And I think that many times are those getting confused there in how do we handle this? And so my question is, how does somebody go about seeking asylum? Because if I believe that I'm being persecuted in my country and I come to the United States and I'm asking for asylum, how do they do that without being detained? What's the proper way? I'll go to Bert and then Mr. Grossman.
Yeah, let me just give you some statistics for folks who want to get here legally. The process was family-sponsored. Refugees, employment, and others. You heard one of the speakers talk about that. So in 2016, 68% came because it was sponsored by family. That was 804,000. Refugees accounted for 120, only 10%. Employment, 12%, 137,000. Other, which included asylum seekers, 120,000, only 10%. This is the pathway that, through legal immigration, that the president wants to get rid of. So they want to get rid of the 68% of how you enter legally here. They want to get rid of that. That's the family-sponsored visas or entry. So for the refugees, and what we're seeing at the border is that every country has a process for asylum seekers who fear for their lives. And many of those families are coming because of that. They're in horrible situations in their country. That's why we need to invest money to fix that big problem that we have. And they're being denied the process, the due process someone mentioned from and the question, and being separated. Those are not people who are crossing across the border. They're presenting themselves to border officials saying, I'm seeking asylum. Get me through the process, and instead their families are being separated.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why many of us are a little skeptical about asylum. Asylum is where somebody is in a dangerous country, a dangerous regime. Their lives are in danger in their country. And you'll notice that most of the asylum seekers are from Central America, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and so on. So they come into Mexico. And are their lives threatened in Mexico? Are they in danger in Mexico? Do they seek asylum in Mexico? Normally, under international law, you seek asylum in your first safe country. They go 1,100 miles. They could stop at the capital, Mexico City, stop at the consulate. They're safe in Mexico. They're being fed in Mexico. They're getting medical care in Mexico. They're getting education in Mexico. They're getting air-conditioned buses in Mexico. But no, they have to come all the way up to the border where they're coached by basically Democratic lawyers coaching them as to what to say. And then they cross the border, and now we have the problem with the separation of children. So again, in my view, this is not real asylum. This is not like they don't have other countries to go to. This is not where there are no safer places in their own country to go to. This is all about politics. This is about all looking for ways to make Americans divided, angry at each other, broke, and angry. And you want to make America great again? Enforce our laws, limit the number of legal immigrants, because I remember when I was a kid, immigrants were welcome because we knew they were here to learn English, to become part of the American way of life. Here, you just read between the lines. It's almost, we're coming to America because you messed up our country and we're going to get even with you. We're entitled to what the wealth you produce because you stole that wealth from us. No, liberty gave us our wealth. We didn't steal our wealth from anybody. But that's what's going on right now.
Thank you.
This is one of the biggest things that I saw when I was doing my research and trying to educate myself on immigration, and it's what I talked about when I spoke to all of you. It's something that's being missed. The policies have to change. Most of the people that are coming across the borders are coming here illegally because they're seeking asylum. Now, just like Mr. Grossman said, they do come from Central America countries and go through Mexico, and their lives are in danger the entire time. Most of these people make that trek on foot. A lot of them go through people that are called coyotes, right? They're called coyotes. They use these people. Sometimes they have no intention of taking them to the American border. But these are people with dreams and hopes and aspirations. They're not going to find it in Mexico. You know, I've been to Mexico. I used to go surfing down in Mexico, and the guy who owned the land that I would go surfing near said, any minute the government can come and just take my land. And the only thing I have is the guns that I have in my house, and I'll fight until I'm dead so that they don't take it. Here we have an eminent domain. You have to go through a bunch of paperwork to do something like that. But that's the reality of Mexico. You know, Mexico may be better than some of the Central American countries in terms of what they might have to offer, but they're still not America. These people, they want to be free, and they're not going to see that freedom in a place like Mexico. And we need to change the pathways to citizenship. It's the most important thing about immigration. The policy has to change because a lot of these people are seeking asylum. And just like I said, if my kids were in trouble, I would do anything it took to get me to the place where I thought they were the safest. Where that is, if that is traversing by foot an entire country to get to another country, I would do it. And I feel like a lot of these people are doing the same thing. You can't label all people drug dealers. You can't label all people bad. I lived in San Diego. I met a lot of people that were like this. I met a lot of people that were illegal immigrants. Some people came to college in San Diego and made the trip back to Mexico every night. And I've been to that border. You could be there for 3 hours. It's a hard life for these people. It's hard. So we have to create a new and better way for the poorer people of Central America and South America to come in and be a part of our country if they can do it, if they pass through all the immigration testing, if they pass through all the health testing. Because if we don't, we're going to just see the same thing happening, illegal immigrants risking their lives and costing us millions of dollars in tax money. Thank you.
If you have to leave, I'm going to go overtime, but because there's a couple more questions that I want to get to. Reverend Mallory, I want to ask you, what is your opinion on DACA, and what should we be doing with the whole decision between the laws that we have in place and with the people that are here, the individuals here? What do you think we should do? If you were in Congress and you had a bill, what would you put forward?
The problem with the DACA children is the way the laws are framed. You know, they're here because of their illegal, their parents came here illegally, and therefore they do not have the status of citizenship. What would I put forth? I'd make them citizens. That's what I would do. And whatever legal process we'd have to go through to do that, that's what we would do. Now, I don't know all of the ins and outs of the immigration law. I'm just like my friend here. I studied up to find out more. But I think that we need to undertake the process of making these people, you know, our values, that people are the greatest treasure on this earth. How do you play that out with the DACA children? How do you make that real? How do you make that become a living force in the lives of these people? You know, we have to make real our values. I mean, we just can't get tangled up in legalese and legal stuff and say we can't do this, we can't do this. I believe that Americans should be solid. I believe that we should make sure that we are solid. I've seen people as a social worker, I've seen people who were shaky trying to help other people who were shaky, and they all went down. You know, we have to be solid as citizens, and we have to be strong. But when it comes down to these DACA children, we have to help them to build the lives that we ourselves have built for ourselves. We have to pull them into the stream. They were raised here. They are enculturated. They economically, socially, and with all the norms, they have been trained. They are, in fact, functioning as American citizens now. They go to school, they get jobs. It's a wonderful thing that has happened for them. That illegal status, their parents bringing them here, was good for them. And we should follow up with letting them, as George Washington said, to give them the full benefits that we ourselves have attained. And that's what I do. How I do it, I'm not a lawyer, but I get some good lawyers around me to put this thing together, but they should be made citizens. That's my thought.
So I'll entertain one for DACA, one one, I'll say on the other side of DACA, and then I have one last question on the border wall. So I'm going to ask somebody pro and somebody con to tell me on the border wall. So,
all right, when it comes to DACA, they're not all children. They're not all the same. Just like every person, you have 2 children, 3 children, 4 children. Are they all the same? No. So in the 655,000 DACA so-called children, many are 30 years old, 35 years old, 25 years old. Some are good students, went to school, have good jobs. Others are thugs, never learned English. Some are drug dealers. Some are sitting in some of the prisons right here in Cumberland County. So I don't think we should treat them all alike or all the same. The ones who have learned English, the ones who have gotten an education, the ones who obeyed the law, the ones who had jobs, we ought to screen them very carefully, and I would put them in the front of the line for the quotas for the green cards. However, the ones who've been here 10, 15, 20 years, never worked, committed crimes, never learned English, never went to school, I see no humanitarian obligation to have them be a burden on the hardworking citizens of this country. So I would send them back.
thank you. So, do I have somebody that, so President Trump, one of the major policies is to build the wall. Do I have somebody that wants to speak for building the wall as a good measure and a good use of funding? Do I have anybody wants to speak on that?
That's the last question.
Well, no, it's the last question. So if you want to have the last question, you'll take that.
I'm not necessarily, I believe that we need to enforce the laws that are already on the books. I also believe that we need to bring all of our intervention throughout the world, all of our United States Army, all of our United States Armed Forces, and bring them back home where they do. We don't need to be spending the time and the resources in Germany or Japan or South Africa and all throughout the world. We've had too much intervention for too long. We need to bring our armed forces back home to help with the problem. As far as I'm concerned, what we need to do is to create the environment from which we provide the deterrent from coming here illegally. Now, a couple of the things I thought was very interesting in the research for this, do you realize how dangerous it is for these people who are trying to get into the country illegally? The people that have been, the drug cartels and the cartels, the savagery that goes on with the people that are trying to enter this country, they're being raped, beaten, sold. Incidentally, ICE, which has taken a lot of heat, is the chief government agency that is actually combating trafficking, human trafficking and human smuggling, taking people and selling them into the slavery and the sex business. ICE is our only chief agency responsible for that. And the other thing, we talk about separation. I don't believe that any child should be separated from its mother and father, ever, anywhere. And that includes in the United States. You know how many atrocities are being committed by the family court systems that are actually taking children away from their parents unjustly? Agencies like the CPC and DYFS and other agencies and Health and Human Resources and Services, all these progressive administrative agencies that are infringing upon the due process rights of parents, that's going on right within our country. But as far as the border is concerned, no child should be separated from their parents because the parent owns the child. As far as the wall is concerned, I say we need to enforce the laws that we have already on the books. To spend money on a wall is, to me, counterproductive. Enforce the laws that are on the books, bring our armed forces back home to monitor what's going on, use the latest in technology to be able to keep our borders safe. But the most important thing, and the one thing that I wanted to share with everyone tonight, that it's important to remember the rights of those who the United States government is supposed to protect, and that is us, the citizens. Thank you.
Real quick.
Pro-war, the anti-war.
All right, real quick, and then I'll go real quick over here. I'm sorry.
No, I have to say this. You know, having worked for the Child Welfare Agency of New Jersey, I have found that when you go into a home and the child has been beaten and battered, first step we take I say took because I'm retired from there, is to remove him and get him to a medical facility. And it is important that he be cared for. Now, we're not going to send him back to the place to his house until we know that he's going to be safe, and that may take a while. Now, the other thing is that we have always sought, when you have to do that, to place a child with his relative, with his relative family, and that's important. But we believe that we cannot leave children in a dangerous situation. And that's why they are removed. Now, the other thing that I was very hurt with was when some of the children were returned to their parents today and yesterday. Some of the children didn't know their mother, they didn't know their father. And you know, that's the thing that really we are all against, separating children and breaking that bond between parent and child. And that has to stop. That can't happen.
All right, Mr. Lopez, I'm giving you the last word for the night.
Yeah, let me just touch on your question regarding the wall, and certainly, you know, what a big waste of money that would be. And I agree with the gentleman at the end here who mentioned it's a much better uses for that money, deterrence, and we still need a secure border, but we still need to address that problem of why there's so much desperation of people wanting to come here and address that issue. And just on the DACA, just a correction, the 800,000 DACA qualify went through a process under the Obama administration. They had to be a high school graduate, no criminal record, and they was a vetted process that qualified them to get their driver's license to be able to work. 800,000. There's about 3 million, over 3 million qualified who probably didn't apply, and there's a lot more that could have qualified. It's about 3 million of those children that came here as youth. They're living productive lives. They're working. I happen to know some of the DACA certificate holders who have driver's license are able to make a living and contribute to the good of this country. I'm hoping that Congress finds a way to at least qualify through that vetted process, to that process that has really worked very well, and get them a path to citizenship.
Thank you. So we've heard I think, a variety of perspectives here this evening, and Ms. Nassari did email me while we were up here, and she had a family emergency that came up, but we did have a variety of perspectives. Let's give them a round of applause again. Because we don't offer them money to come out here to come speak to you. But I wanted to just say this. One of the things that I hear from people is, well, how do I know what is true, right? You know, we get the label of fake news, and there's this website and what you're looking on Facebook. And so if I could give you a little advice on what I tell my congregation, is the same thing I tell my students, and it's the same thing I tell my father and my mother and everybody else around me. And that is, read, pick up newspapers, turn off the television, and read. And you got to read things. So what I do in the morning, and you could pick on this, I read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. I read two things from two different perspectives, trying to get, and to seek out, use my brain to try to find that information there. But to say that you can't find the information is actually an excuse for laziness. You can find the information. Seek the truth out there. All right, the truth is there for you to seek out. And the purpose of these forums is for you to begin to hear those perspectives here and to continue the dialogue out there. To continue, people tell me, my mom and I went to Washington, D.C. the other day, and we were speaking in the car, and she's not here tonight, so I'll pick on her. Last month I picked on my dad. But we're driving down, and she made a statement, and I asked her a question to follow up. How do you know? And she couldn't answer that, and she got frustrated, and she goes, you know what? We shouldn't be talking about politics. That, this is one of those areas of a family, I guess we shouldn't talk about it. And I remember my father saying, well, we can't talk about it around the dinner table. And I said, if we can't talk about it around the dinner table, where can we talk about it? If we can't talk about it in our communities, where can we talk about it? We have to learn to listen and to talk. And one of the things that really bothers me and concerns me is our tribalism that we have, where we all run to our camps. And I'm on the left camp, and I'm on the right camp. But America isn't about camps. It's about coming together and finding that middle ground and finding where the solution is in our dialogue. Nobody here had all the answers or will have all the answers. That's why it starts off, we the people. So with that, I want to leave us with this benediction. Will you please stand with me? May God bless us with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that we may live deep within our hearts. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless us with enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in this world, so that we can do what others claim cannot be done. And all God's children said, Amen.